Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I am back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mr. Manly Hall. We are in the Secret Teachings of All Ages. We will be reading Chapter 7, which is the Initiation of the Pyramid. Before we begin, if you are unfamiliar with me or what I am doing here, or what any of my unconventional beliefs may be, they are linked in the corner up here and in the box down below, as well as the source material. With that being said, we are going to dive in and read from Mr. Manly Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, The Initiation of the Pyramid. Supreme among the wonders of antiquity, unrivaled by the achievements of later architects and builders, the great pyramids of Giza bear mute witness to an unknown civilization, which, having completed its predestined span, passed into oblivion. Eloquent in its silence, inspiring in its majesty, divine in its simplicity, the Great Pyramid is, indeed, a sermon in stone. Its magnitude overwhelms the puny sensibilities of man. Among the shifting sands of time, it stands as a fitting emblem of eternity itself. Who were the illumined mathematicians who planned its parts and dimensions? The master craftsmen who supervised its construction, the skilled artisans who trued its blocks of stone. The earliest and best known account of the building of the Great Pyramid is that given by the highly revered but somewhat imaginative historian Herodotus. The pyramid was built in steps, battlement-wise, as it is called, or, according to others, altar-wise. After laying the stones for the base, they raised the remaining stones to their places by means of machines formed of short wooden planks. The first machine raised them from the ground to the top of the first step. On this, there was another machine which received the stone upon its arrival and conveyed it to the second step, whence a third machine advanced it still higher. Either they had as many machines as there were steps in the pyramid, or possibly they had but a single machine, which, being easily moved, was transferred from tier to tier as the stone rose. Both accounts were given, and therefore I mention both. The upper portion of the pyramid was finished first, then the middle, and finally the part which was lowest and nearest the ground. There is an inscription in the Egyptian characters on the pyramid, which records the quantity of radishes, onions, and garlic consumed by the laborers who constructed it, and I perfectly well remember that the interpreter, who read the writing to me, said that the money expended in this way was 1,600 talents of silver. If this is a true record, what a vast sum must have been spent on the iron tools used in the work, and on the feeding and clothing of the laborers, considering the length of time the work lasted, which has already been stated, 10 years, and the additional time, no small space I imagine, which must have been occupied by the quarrying of the stones, their conveyance, and the formation of the underground apartments. While his account is extremely colorful, it is apparent that the father of history, for reasons he doubtless considered sufficient, concocted a fraudulent story to conceal the true origin and purpose of the Great Pyramid. This is but one of several instances in his writings which would lead the thoughtful reader to suspect that Herodotus himself was an initiate of the sacred schools, and consequently obligated to preserve inviolate the secrets of the ancient orders. The theory advanced by Herodotus is now generally accepted that the pyramid was the tomb of the pharaoh Cheops. Cannot be substantiated. In fact, Manetho, Eratosthenes, and Diodorus Siculus all differ from Herodotus, as well as from each other, regarding the name of the builder of this supreme edifice. The sepulchral vault, which, according to Lepsius' law of pyramid construction, should have been finished at the same time as the monument or sooner, was never completed. There is no proof that the building was erected by the Egyptians, for the elaborate carvings with which the burial chambers of Egyptian royalty are almost invariably ornamented are entirely lacking, and it embodies none of the elements of their architecture. or decoration, such as inscriptions, images, cartouches, paintings, or other distinctive features associated with dynastic mortuary art. The only hieroglyphics to be found within the pyramid are a few builder's marks, sealed up in the chambers of construction, first opened by Howard Weiss. These, apparently, were painted upon the stones before they were set in position, for in a number of instances the marks were either inverted or disfigured by the operation of fitting the blocks together. While Egyptologists have attempted to identify the crude dabs of paint as cartouches of Cheops, it is almost inconceivable that this ambitious ruler would have permitted his royal name to suffer such indignities. As the most eminent authorities on the subject are still uncertain as to the true meaning of the crude markings, whatever proof they might be that the building was erected during the Fourth Dynasty is certainly offset by the seashells at the base of the pyramid, which Mr. Gabb advances as evidence that it was erected before the deluge, a theory substantiated by the much abused Arabian traditions. One Arabian historian declared that the pyramid was built by the Egyptian sages as a refuge against the flood, while another proclaimed it to have been the treasure house of the powerful antediluvian king Shaddad bin Ad. A panel of hieroglyphics over the entrance, which the casual observer might consider to afford a solution of the mystery, unfortunately dates back no further than A.D. 1843, having been cut at that time by Dr. Lepsius as a tribute to the King of Prussia. Okay, we're going to pause for just a second, and I'm going to talk about it because I have a video called the 12,000 Year Disaster Cycle, where we talk about a predictable cycle that happens every 6,000 years. There is one event that happens at a 12,000 year mark and another one at the halfway mark. So it's 12,000 years ago we had a hot event, and then 6,000 years ago we had a wet event, right? The deluge, the flood, that would be the wet event. The Eden event with the flaming sword of fire that cast them out of Eden and changed the climate of the world, that would be the fire event. And prior to that, there was another flood event. Prior to that, there was another fire event. We are now entering into the time of, imminently, I believe, of another fire event. It's going to be devastating for most of the world. Most people will not make it. I probably won't make it. You probably won't make it, but you might. And if you do, then you need to be prepared for the other side of it. There is the disaster cycle. We'll give you the references to other people where you can find more information on what should happen and how it should take place. If you are interested, you should definitely check out that video. I personally believe that there was another civilization prior to the fire event. There was another one between the fire event and the water event, right? Which was the deluge. This is talking about that time period, and I believe that it is entirely possible that the reason the pyramid was put there was a marker that this cycle will happen. It has to do with the alignment of the stars and the tilt of the earth and how it's a little bit different than where it should be now, taking into account the precession of the equinoxes. That does not make me an astronomer, right? I'm not trying to say that I know astrophysics better than anybody else. I'm just saying that some things add up a little bit differently than we are told by the people in charge. Most of the people in charge of Egyptian history have a doctrine that they follow very rigidly, and anything deviating from that is unacceptable. That is the problem with academia today. That is the problem with the peer review process. And so some other histories that are probably more valid are dismissed flat out of hand, and that is a significant issue. There are other resources that you can find to talk about that, but the Brothers of the Serpent is a good podcast if you want to start digging into some of the specifics of the alternative histories. I do believe that there was a civilization. I do believe that it was wiped out along with most of the evidence during the deluge. That doesn't mean that they had hydroelectrics, but they could have. It's entirely possible. 6,000 years is a long time for decomposition to happen, especially if most of it was buried in mud. All right, back to here. Caliph al-Mamun, an illustrious descendant of the Prophet, inspired by stories of the immense treasures sealed within its depths,
journeyed from Baghdad to Cairo, AD 820, with a great force of workmen to open the mighty pyramid. When Caliph al-Mamun first reached the foot of the Rock of Ages and gazed up at its smooth, glistening surface, the tumult of emotions undoubtedly racked his soul. The casting stones must have been placed at the time of his visit, for the Caliph could find no indication of an entrance. 4 perfectly smooth surfaces confronted him. Following vague rumors, he set his followers to work on the north side of the pyramid with instructions to keep on cutting and chiseling until they discovered something. To the Muslims, with their crude instruments and vinegar, it was a Herculean effort to tunnel a full 100 feet through limestone. Many times they were on the point of rebellion, but the word of the Caliph was law, and the hope of a vast fortune buoyed them up. At last, on the eve of total discouragement, fate came to their rescue. A great stone was heard to fall somewheres in the wall near the toiling and disgruntled Arabs. Pushing on towards the sound with renewed enthusiasm, they finally broke into the descending passage which leads into the subterranean chamber. They then chiseled their way around the great stone portcullis, which had fallen into a position barring their progress, and attacked and removed one after another of the granite plugs, which for a while continued to slide down the passage leading from the Queen's chamber above. Finally, no more blocks descended, and the way was clear for the followers of the Prophet. But where were the treasures? From room to room the frantic workmen rushed, looking in vain for loot. The discontents of the Muslim reached such a height that Caliph al-Mamun, who had inherited much of the wisdom of his illustrious father, the Caliph al-Rashid, sent to Baghdad for funds, which he caused to be secretly buried near the entrance of the pyramid. He then ordered his men to dig at that spot, and great was their rejoicing when the treasure was discovered. The workmen being deeply impressed by the wisdom of the antediluvian monarch, who had carefully estimated their wages and thoughtfully caused the exact amount to be buried for their benefit. The Caliph then returned to the city of his fathers, and the great pyramid was left to the mercy of succeeding generations. In the 9th century, the sun's rays striking the highly polished surfaces of the original casing stones, caused each side of the pyramid to appear as a dazzling triangle of light. Since that time, all but 2 of these casing stones have disappeared. Investigation has resulted in their discovery, recut and resurfaced in the walls of the Mohammedan mosque and palaces in various parts of Cairo and its environs. This is the Sphinx, as portrayed, altered from the original intent, almost certainly. The Egyptian Sphinx is closely related to the Greek legend of Epidius, who first solved the famous riddle propounded by the mysterious creature with the body of a winged lion and the head of a woman, which frequented the highway leading to Thebes. To each who passed her lair, the Sphinx addressed the question, "What animal is it that in the morning goes on 4 feet, at noon on 2 feet, and in the evening on 3 feet?" Those who failed to answer her riddle she destroyed. Oedipus declared the answer to be man himself, who in childhood crawled upon his hands and knees, in manhood stood erect, and in old age shuffled along by supporting himself by a staff. Discovering one who knew the answer to her riddle, the Sphinx cast herself from the cliff which bordered the road and perished. There is still another answer to the riddle of the Sphinx, an answer best revealed by consideration of Pythagorean values of numbers. The 4, the 2, and the 3 produce the sum of 9, which is the natural number of man and also of the lower worlds. The 4 represents the ignorant man, the 2 the intellectual man, and 3 the spiritual man. Infant humanity walks on 4 legs. Evolving humanity on 2 legs, and to the power of his own mind, the redeemed and illumined Magus adds the staff of wisdom. The Sphinx is, therefore, the mystery of nature, and the embodiment of the secret doctrine, and all who cannot solve her riddle perish. To pass the Sphinx is to attain personal immortality. Pyramid problems. C. Piazzi Smith asks, Was the Great Pyramid, then, erected before the invention of hieroglyphics and previous to the birth of the Egyptian religion? Time may yet prove that the upper chambers of the pyramid were a sealed mystery before the establishment of the Egyptian Empire. In the subterranean chamber, however, are markings which indicate that the Romans gained admission here. In the light of the secret philosophy of the Egyptian initiates, W. W. Harmon, by a series of extremely complicated yet exact mathematical calculations, determines that the first ceremonial of the pyramid was performed 68,890 years ago, on the occasion when the star Vega for the first time sent its ray down the descending passage into the pit. The actual building of the pyramid was accomplished in the period from 10 to 15 years immediately preceding this date. While such figures doubtless will evoke the ridicule of modern Egyptologists, they are based upon an exhaustive study of the principles of sidereal mechanics, as incorporated into the structure of the pyramid by its initiated builders. If the casing stones were in a position at the beginning of the 9th century, the so-called erosion marks on the outside were not due to water. The theory also that the salt upon the interior stones of the pyramid is evidence that the building was once submerged is weakened by the scientific fact that this kind of stone is subject to exudations of salt. While the building may have been submerged, at least in part, during the many thousands of years since its erection, the evidence adduced to prove this point is not conclusive. The Great Pyramid was built of limestone and granite throughout, the two kinds of rock being combined in a peculiar and significant manner. The stones were trued with the utmost precision, and the cement used was of such remarkable quality that it is now practically as hard as the stone itself. The limestone blocks were sawed with bronze saws, the teeth of which were diamonds or other jewels. The chips from the stones were piled against the north side of the plateau, on which the structure stands, where they form an additional buttress to aid in supporting the weight of the structure. The entire pyramid is an example of perfect orientation and actually squares the circle. This last is accomplished by dropping a vertical line from the apex of the pyramid to its baseline. If this vertical line be considered as the radius of an imaginary circle, the length of the circumference of such a circle will be found to equal the sum of the baselines of the four sides of the pyramid. If the passage leading to the king's chamber and the queen's chamber was sealed up thousands of years before the Christian era, those later admitted into the pyramid mysteries must have received their initiations in subterranean galleries now unknown. Without such galleries there could have been no possible means of ingress or egress. Since the single surface entrance was completely dosed with casing stones, if not blocked by the mass of the Sphinx or concealed in some part of that image, the secret entrance may be either in one of the adjacent temples or upon the sides of the limestone plateau. Attention is called to the granite plugs filling the ascending passageway to the Queen's chamber, which Caliph al-Mamun was forced to practically pulverize before he could clear a way into the upper chambers. C. Piazzi Smith notes that the positions of the stones demonstrate that they were set in place from above, which makes it necessary for a considerable number of workmen to depart from the upper chambers. How did they do it? Smith believes that they descended through the well, see diagram, dropping the ramp stone into place behind them. He further contends that robbers probably used the well as a means of getting into the upper chambers. The ramp stone having been set in a bed of plaster, the robbers were forced to break through it, leaving a jagged opening. Mr. Dupré, an architect who has spent years investigating the pyramids, differs from Smith, however, in that he believes the well itself to be a robber's hole, being the first successful attempt made to enter the upper chambers from the subterranean chamber, then the only section of the pyramid. I am going to interject here just for a minute with my own personal speculations based upon almost nothing. Right? I accumulate knowledge, but I don't recall sources. It's one of my peccadillos. It's just something that just never works for me. I have never been able to pull scripture out unless I was really, really, really trying. And I've never been one that's able to say, yeah, I read that here. But I do remember reading it, right? I do remember that, and I do put the pieces together from different places. I just don't source. And so I'm never going to be what you would consider reliable sourcing. But from what I have been able to piece together from the various things that I have read, that the initiation process does seem to be what this was about. The casing stones, being white, was specific. One was red, one was black. There was various colors scattered up and down the Nile. And so it is entirely possible that there was a later initiatory process that was simulated by that. Right? There was never any funeral things in the actual pyramid, right? The Great Pyramid of Khufu. The other ones, some of them did have burial implements and even mummified remains in some of them, but there was nothing of that sort in this one. But there is a series of chambers that go down. We've talked about that in a different video, and we will probably talk about it before we get to the end of this one, right? You have to direct energy in a specific manner. Let's go ahead and get it out of the way. And the pyramid's a good way to look at that. It's a very good explanation of how to direct the energy through your stack in order to activate your third eye. There's another video for that. I believe, in my conspiratorial mind, right, that there is a connection between those chambers and the descending chamber that goes into the abyss type situation there. I believe that there's going to be found a link from that over probably to the Sphinx. And there will be another 4 or 3 processing points in the description of the ascension process. And that the original, you entered through the Sphinx, went through those 3 into the 4th, and then up the 3 that we talked about in the other video. And so, more than likely, in my conspiratorial mind, that's what's going to come out of it. And that the white casing stones were the assimilation process, right? And the capstone, which was probably there at one point and robbed, was more than likely precious metal. It was more than likely gold for reasons that I explained in the crystal video. And more than likely, this was the final step of ascension in the whatever mystery religion was their pre-fire event when the pyramid was most likely built. Okay. I think we're ready to go back to the text. So, Mr. Dupree bases his conclusions upon the fact that the well is merely a rough hole in a grotto in an irregular chamber, without any evidence of the architectural precision with which the remainder of the structure was erected. The diameter of the well also precludes the possibility of its having been dug downward. It must have been gouged out from below, and the grotto was necessary to supply air to the thieves. It is inconceivable that the pyramid builders would break one of their own ramp stones and leave it broken surface and a gaping hole in the side wall of their otherwise perfect gallery. If the well is a robber's hole, it may explain why the pyramid was empty when Caliph al-Mamun entered it and what happened to the missing coffer lid. A careful examination of the so-called unfinished subterranean chamber, which may have been the base of operations for the robbers, might disclose traces of their presence or show where they piled the rubble, which must have accumulated as a result of their operations. While it is not entirely clear by what entrance the robbers reached the subterranean chamber, it is improbable that they used the descending passageway. There is a remarkable niche in the north wall of the Queen's Chamber which the Mohammedan guides glibly pronounce to be a shrine. The general shape of this niche, however, with its walls converging by a series of overlaps like those of the Grand Gallery, would indicate that it had been intended as a passageway. Efforts made to explore this niche have been non-productive, but Mr. Dupree believes an entrance to exist through which, if the well did not exist at the time, the workmen made their exit from the pyramid after dropping the stone plugs into the ascending gallery. Biblical scholars have contributed a number of the most extraordinary conceptions regarding the Great Pyramid. This ancient edifice has been identified by them as Joseph's granary, despite its hopelessly inadequate capacity, as the tomb prepared for the unfortunate pharaoh of the Exodus, who could not be buried there because his body was never recovered from the Red Sea, and finally as a perpetual confirmation of the infallibility of the numerous prophecies contained in the authorized version. The Sphinx. Although the Great Pyramid, as Ignatius Donnelly has demonstrated, is patterned after an antediluvian type of architecture, examples of which are to be found in nearly every part of the world. Okay, another pause here because it is important to note that this one pyramid in Giza is entirely different than all the rest of them. The other ones appear to be mimicry of that one. The one pyramid in Giza is mathematically precise in a way that none of the rest of them are. It is built in a manner in which none of the rest of them duplicate, although they try very hard. It was built using some method that we do not currently have. We do not have the capacity in our fuel-powered gas and diesel-driven age with electricity and all of the things that we have. We can't move some of these stones. Take from that what you will. Take that back, 6,000 years, 5,000 years, or whatever the Egyptologists claim, and line that up. Try and figure out how they managed to get that uphill. Work on that in there. See if you come up with something better than what I have, because some of these stones are massive. Like, massive. Like, you can't even comprehend the scope of these stones. They are huge. If you saw them in real life, you'd be like, oh, there is no way somebody pulled that uphill a couple hundred miles through the desert. Like, it does not make sense. There has to be something there that we don't have. Now, what it is, I don't know. Right? I'm not claiming to be that expert. I'm just saying that there's something definitely fucky about it. I don't know what it is. And so when it says here that there are examples everywhere else, that is true. There are pyramids on every single continent. There are pyramids that have been used in ritual ceremonies. They're all a little bit different. Some of them are remarkably similar, but none of them are exactly the same as the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's just not a thing. And so that it needs to be very clear. If there is any imitation, it is coming from Giza, not to Giza. Also, the mathematical precision there, I'm going to throw this name out there again. Y'all need to check out Jason Brashears over at Archaics, because his pyramid video is very much technical about the math of the pyramid. It's a great one to watch. I believe that he has the wrong keys in his interpretations, but that does not mean that his science is wrong. Doesn't mean that his sourcing is wrong. So you should check that one out, because he goes into a lot more detail about the precision required to make that one particular thing much better than I can. I will try to remember to leave a link down below. If I forget, y'all remind me. All right, back to the text. Examples of which are to be found in nearly every part of the world. The Sphinx, is typically Egyptian. The stele between his paws states that the Sphinx is an image of the sun god, Harmachis, which was evidently made in the similitude of the pharaoh during whose reign it was chiseled. The statue was restored and completely excavated by Tahutmes IV, as a result of a vision in which the god had appeared and declared himself oppressed by the weight of the sand about his body. The broken beard of the Sphinx was discovered during excavations between the front paws. The steps leading up to the Sphinx and also the temple and altar between the paws are much later additions, probably Roman, for it is known that the Romans reconstructed many Egyptian antiquities. The shallow depression in the crown of the head, once thought to be the terminus of a closed-up passageway leading from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid, was merely intended to help support a headdress now missing. Metal rods have been driven into the Sphinx in a vain effort to discover chambers or passages within its body. It's going to be underneath. The major part of the Sphinx is a single stone, but the front paws have been built up of smaller stones. The Sphinx is about 200 feet long, 70 feet high, and 38 feet wide across the shoulders. That is That is almost the size of a small warship. The main stone from which it was carved is believed to be by some to have been transported from distant quarries by methods unknown, while others assert it to be native rock, possibly an outcropping somewhat resembling the form into which it was later carved. The theory, once advanced, that both the pyramid and the Sphinx were built from artificial stones made on the spot has been abandoned. A careful analysis of the limestone shows it to be composed of small sea creatures called mumulites. The popular supposition that the Sphinx was the true portal of the Great Pyramid, while it survives with surprising tenacity, has never been substantiated. Again, I was conspiratorial when I said that earlier. P. Christian presents this theory as follows, basing it in part upon the theory of Iamblichus. The Sphinx of Giza, says the author of the Traité de Mystère, served as the entrance to the sacred subterranean chambers in which the trials of the initiate were undergone. This entrance, obstructed in our day by sands and rubbish, may still be traced between the forelegs of the crouched colossus. It was formerly closed by a bronze gate, whose secret spring could only be operated by the Magi. It was guarded by public respect, and a sort of religious fear maintained its inviolability better than armed protection would have done. In the belly of the Sphinx were cut out galleries leading to the subterranean part of the Great Pyramid. These galleries were so artfully crisscrossed along their course to the pyramid that in setting forth into the passage without a guide through this network, one ceaselessly and inevitably turned to the starting point. See History de la Magie. Unfortunately, the bronze door referred to cannot be found, nor is there any evidence that it ever existed. The passing centuries have wrought many changes in the Colossus, however, and the original opening may have been closed. Nearly all students of the subject believe that the subterranean chambers exist beneath the Great Pyramid. Robert Ballard writes, the priests of the pyramids of Lake Moeris had their vast subterranean residences, and it appears to me more than probable that those of Giza were similarly provided. And I may go further. Out of these very caverns may have been excavated the limestone of which the pyramids were built. In the bowels of the limestone ridge on which, wow, that's a long one, the pyramids are built will yet be found. I feel convinced ample information as to their uses. A good diamond drill with 200 or 300 feet of rods is what is wanted to test this, and the solidarity of the pyramids at the same time. We'll come back to the conclusion of that. We're going to go back up to this vertical section of the Great Pyramid, and I am going to steal this image real quick. And it has various things noted here, and we'll go ahead and pull this over so we can see it a little bit. We see I have the ascending passage. Can you see my mouse? Yes, you can. The ascending passage goes up here at a 26-degree angle, and this one comes down. This is the descending passage. There is a chasm that goes down right here. It is a natural formation, and it has been attempted to be filled over the years by various authorities, and I do believe that the passage that will lead over to the Sphinx will probably be found here. And again, that is pure speculation upon my part, and I am fully aware of that. The Great Pyramid stands upon a limestone plateau, at the base of which, according to the ancient history, the Nile once flooded, thus supplying a method for the huge blocks used in its construction. Presuming that the capstone as originally in place, the pyramid is, according to John Taylor, in round figures, 486 feet high. The base of each side is 764 feet long, and the entire structure covers a ground area of more than 13 acres. The Great Pyramid is the only one in the group at Giza, in fact, as far as known, the only one in Egypt, that has chambers within the actual body of the pyramid itself. For this reason, it is said to refute the Lepsius law, which asserts that each of these structures is a monument raised over a subterranean chamber in which a ruler is entombed. The pyramid contains 4 chambers, which in the diagram are lettered K, H, F, and O. The King's Chamber, K, is an oblong apartment, 39 feet long, 17 feet wide, and 19 feet high. disregarding fractional parts of a foot in each case, with a flat roof consisting of 9 great stones, the largest in the pyramid. Above the king's chamber are 5 low compartments, L, generally termed construction chambers. In the lowest of these so-called hieroglyphs of the pharaoh Cheops are located. The roof of the 5th construction chamber is peaked. At the end of the king's chamber, opposite the entrance, stands the famous sarcophagus, or coffer, I, and behind it, in a shallow opening that was dug in the hope of discovering valuables, 2 air vents, M and N, passing through the entire body of the pyramid, ventilate the king's chamber. In itself, this is sufficient to establish that the building was not intended for a tomb. Between the upper end of the grand gallery, GG, and the king's chamber is a small antechamber, H. Its extreme length is 9 feet, its extreme width 5 feet, and its extreme height 12 feet, with its walls grooved for purposes now unknown. In the grove nearest the grand gallery is a slab of stone in 2 sections, with a peculiar boss, or knob, protruding about an inch from the surface of the upper part facing the grand gallery. This stone does not reach the floor of the antechamber, and those entering the king's chamber must pass under the slab. From the king's chamber, the grand gallery, 157 feet in length, 28 feet in height, 7 feet in width at its widest point, and decreasing to 3.5 feet as the result of 7 converging overlaps of the stones forming the walls, descends to a little above the level of the queen's chamber. Here, a gallery, E, branches off, and passing more than 100 feet back towards the center of the pyramid and opening into the queen's chamber, F. The queen's chamber is 19 feet long, 17 feet wide, and 20 feet high. Its roof is peaked and composed of great slabs of stone. Air passages, not shown, lead from the queen's chamber, but these were not open originally. In the east wall of the queen's chamber is a peculiar niche of gradually converging stone, which in all likelihood may prove to be a new, lost entranceway. At the pane where the grand gallery ends, and the horizontal passage where the queen's chamber begins, is the entrance to the well, and also the opening leading down to the first ascending passage, D, to the point where this passage meets the descending passage, A, leading from the outer wall of the pyramid down to the subterranean chamber. After descending 59 feet down the well, P, the grotto is reached. Continuing through the floor of the grotto, the well leads downward 133 feet to the descending passage, A, which it meets in a short distance before the passage becomes horizontal and leads into the subterranean chamber. The subterranean chamber, O, is about 46 feet long and 27 feet wide, but it is extremely low, the ceiling varying in height from a little over 3 feet to about 13 feet from the rough and apparently unfinished floor. From the south side of the subterranean chamber, a low tunnel runs about 50 feet and then meets a blank wall. These constitute the only known openings in the pyramid, with the exception of a few niches, exploration holes, blind passages, and the rambling cavernous tunnel, B, hewn out by the Muslims under the leadership of the Prophet's descendant, Caliph al-Mamun. Alright, back to the text. Mr. Ballard's theory of extensive underground apartments and quarries bring up an important problem in architectonics. The pyramid builders were too far-sighted to endanger the permanence of the Great Pyramid by placing over 5 million tons of limestone and granite on any but a solid foundation. It is therefore reasonably certain that such chambers or passageways as may exist beneath the building are relatively insignificant, like those within the body of the structure, which occupy less than 1/1600th of the cubic contents of the pyramid. The Sphinx was undoubtedly erected for symbolical purposes as at the instigation of the priestcraft. The theories that the uraeus upon its forehead was originally the finger of an immense sundial, and that both the pyramid and the Sphinx were used to measure time, the seasons, and the precession of the equinoxes are ingenious, but not wholly convincing. If this great creature was erected to obliterate the ancient passageway leading into the subterranean temple of the pyramid, its symbolism would be most appropriate. In comparison with the overwhelming size and dignity of the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx is almost insignificant. Its battered face, upon which may still be seen the vestiges of the red paint with which the figure was originally covered, is disfigured beyond recognition. Its nose was broken off by a fanatical Mohammedan, lest the followers of the Prophet be led into idolatry. The very nature of its construction and the present repairs necessary to prevent the head from falling off indicated that it could not have survived the great periods of time which have elapsed since the erection of the pyramid. To the Egyptians, the Sphinx was the symbol of strength and intelligence. It was portrayed as androgynous to signify that they recognized the initiates and gods as partaking of both the positive and negative creative powers. Gerald Massey writes, "This is the secret of the Sphinx. The Orthodox Sphinx of the Egypt is masculine in front and feminine behind. So is the image of Sotafon, a type of horn and tail, male in front and female behind. The pharaohs who wore the tail of the lioness or cow behind them were male in front and female behind. Like the gods, they excluded the dual totality of being in one person, born of the mother, but of both sexes as the child. See the natural genesis." Most investigators have ridiculed the Sphinx, and without even deigning to investigate the great colossus, have turned their attention to the more overwhelming mystery of the pyramid. The Pyramid Mysteries. The word pyramid is popularly supposed to have been derived from Greek word, fire, thus signifying that it is the symbolic representation of the one divine flame, the life of every creature. John Taylor believes the word pyramid to mean a measure of wheat, while C. Piazzi Smith favors the Coptic meaning, a division into 10. The initiates of old accepted the pyramid form as the ideal symbol of both the secret doctrine and those institutions established for its dissemination. Both pyramids and mounds are antitypes of the holy mountain, or holy place of God, which was believed to stand in the midst of the earth. John P. Lundy relates the Great Pyramid to the fabled Olympus, further assuming that its subterranean passages correspond to the tortuous byways of Hades. The square base of the pyramid is a constant reminder that the House of Wisdom is firmly founded upon nature and her immutable laws. The Gnostics, writes Albert Pike, claimed that the whole edifice of their science rested on a square whose angles were silence, profundity, intelligence, and truth. See Morals and Dogma. The sides of the Great Pyramid face the four cardinal angles, the latter signifying, according to Eliphas Levi, the extremities of heat and cold, south and north, and the extremities of light and darkness, east and west. The base of the pyramid further represents the four material elements or substances from the contributions of which the quaternary body of man is formed. From each side of the square there rises a triangle, typifying the threefold divine being enthroned within every quaternary material nature. If each baseline be considered a square, from which ascends a threefold spiritual power, then the sum of the lines of the four faces, 12, and the four hypothetical squares, 16, constituting the base is 28, the sacred number of the lower world. If this be added to the three septennaries composing the sun, 21, it equals 49, the square of 7, and the number of the universe. I believe that if you're trying to add that much, you're probably doing something wrong. The 12 signs of the zodiac, like the governors of the lower world, are symbolized by the 12 lines of the four triangles. The faces of the pyramid, in the midst of each face, is one of the beasts of Ezekiel, and the structure as a whole becomes the cherubim. The three main chambers of the pyramid are related to the heart, the brain, and the generative system, the spiritual system centers of human constitution. The triangular form of the pyramid also is similar to the posture assumed by the body during the ancient meditative exercises. The mysteries taught that the divine energies from the gods descended upon the top of the pyramid, which was likened to an inverted tree, with its branches below and its roots at the apex. From this inverted tree, the divine wisdom is disseminated by streaming down the diverging sides and radiating throughout the world. The size of the capstone of the Great Pyramid cannot be accurately determined, for while most of the investigators have assumed that it was once in place, no vestige of it now remains. There is a curious tendency among the builders of the great religious edifices to leave their creations unfinished, thereby signifying that God alone is complete. The capstone, if it existed, was itself a miniature pyramid, the apex of which again would be capped by a smaller block of similar shape, and so on ad infinitum. The capstone, therefore, is the epitome of the entire structure. Thus, the pyramid may be likened to the universe and the capstone to man. Following the chain of analogy, the mind is the capstone of man, the spirit the capstone of the mind, and God the epitome of the whole, the capstone of the spirit. As a rough and unfinished block, man is taken from the quarry and by the secret culture of the mysteries gradually transformed into a true and perfect pyramidal capstone. The temple is complete only when the initiate himself becomes the living apex through which the divine power is focused into the diverging structure below. W. Marsham Adams calls the Great Pyramid the House of the Hidden Places. Such indeed it was, for it represented the inner sanctuary of pre-Egyptian wisdom. By the Egyptians, the Great Pyramid was associated with Hermes, the god of wisdom and letters, and the divine illuminator worshipped through the planet Mercury. Relating Hermes to the pyramid emphasizes anew the fact that it was in reality the supreme temple of the invisible and supreme deity. The Great Pyramid was not a lighthouse, an observatory, or a tomb, but the first temple of the mysteries, the first structure erected as a repository for those secret truths which are the certain foundation of all arts and sciences. It was the perfect emblem of the microcosm and the macrocosm, and according to the secret teachings, the tomb of Osiris, the black god of the Nile. Osiris represents a certain manifestation of solar energy, and therefore his house or tomb is emblematic of the universe within which he is entombed and upon the cross of which he is crucified. Through the mystic passageways and chambers of the Great Pyramid passed the illumined of antiquity. They entered its portals as men. They came forth as gods. It was the place of the second birth, the womb of the mysteries, and wisdom dwelt in it as God dwells in the hearts of men. Somewhere in the depths of its recesses there resided an unknown being who is called the Initiator, or the Illustrious One. Robed in blue and gold, and bearing in his hand the sevenfold key of eternity. This was the lion-faced Hierophant, the Holy One, the Master of Masters, who never left the House of Wisdom, and whom no man ever saw, save he who had passed through the gates of preparation and purification. It was in these chambers that Plato, he of the broad brow, came face to face with the wisdom of the ages, personified in the master of the hidden house. Who was the master dwelling in the mighty pyramid, the many rooms of which signified the worlds in space? The master whom none might behold save those who had been born again. He alone fully knew the secret of the pyramid, but he has departed the ways of the wise, and the house is empty. The hymns of praise no longer echo in muffled tones through the chambers. The neophyte no longer passes through the elements and wanders among the seven stars. The candidate no longer receives the word of life from the lips of the Eternal One. Nothing now remains that the eye of man can see but an empty shell, the outer symbol of an inner truth. And men call the house of God a tomb. The technique of the mysteries was unfolded by the sage illuminator, the master of the secret house. The power to know his guardian spirit was revealed to the new initiate. The method of disentangling his material body from his divine vehicle was explained. And to consummate the magnum opus, there was revealed the divine name. the secret and unutterable designation of the supreme deity, by the very knowledge of which man and his God are made consciously one. With the giving of the name, the new initiate became himself a pyramid, within the chambers of whose soul numberless other human beings might also receive spiritual enlightenment. I kept doing this because I had been there. That's where I was initiated into the Melchizedek order. In the king's chamber was enacted the drama of the second death, not inside the pyramid. Here the candidate, after being crucified upon the cross of solstices and the equinoxes, was buried in the great coffer. There is a profound mystery to the atmosphere and temperature of the king's chamber. It is of peculiar death-like cold which cuts to the marrow of the bone. This room was a doorway between the material world and the transcendental spheres of nature. While his body lay in the coffer, the soul of the neophyte soared as a human-headed hawk through the celestial realms, there to discover first-hand the eternity of life, light, and truth, as well as the illusions of death, darkness, and sin. Upper and lower, imagine that. Thus, in one sense, the Great Pyramid may be likened to a gate through which the ancient priests permitted a few to pass towards the attainment of individual completion. It is also to be noted, incidentally, that if the coffer in the king's chamber be struck, the sound emitted has no counterpart in any known musical scale. This tonal value may have formed part of the combination of circumstances which rendered the king's chamber an ideal setting for the conferment of the highest degree of the mysteries. The modern world knows little of these ancient rites. The scientist and the theologian alike gaze upon the sacred structure, wondering what fundamental urge inspired the Herculean labor. If they would but think for a moment, they would realize that there is only one urge in the soul of man capable of supplying the required incentive, namely, the desire to know, to understand, and to exchange the narrowness of human mortality for the greater breadth and scope of divine enlightenment. So men say of the Great Pyramid that it is the most perfect building in the world, the source of weights and measures, the original Noah's Ark, the origin of languages, alphabets, and scales of temperature and humidity. Few realize, however, that it is the gateway to the eternal. Though the modern world may know 1,000,000 secrets, the ancient world knew one. And that one was greater than the million, for the 1,000,000 secrets breed death, disaster, sorrow, selfishness, lust, and avarice. But the one secret confers life, light, and truth. The time will come when the secret wisdom shall again be the dominating religious and philosophical urge of the world. The day is at hand when the doom of dogma shall be sounded. The great theological Tower of Babel, with its confusion of tongues, was built of bricks and mud, and the mortar of slime. Out of the cold ashes of lifeless creeds, however, shall rise, phoenix-like, the ancient mysteries. No other institution has so completely satisfied the religious aspirations of humanity, for since the destruction of the mysteries there has never been a religious code to which Plato could have subscribed. The unfolding of man's spiritual nature is as much an exact science as astronomy, medicine, or jurisprudence. To accomplish this end, religions were primarily established, and out of religion have come science, philosophy, and logic as methods whereby this divine purpose might be realized. The dying God shall rise again. The secret room in the house of the hidden places shall be rediscovered. The pyramid, again, shall stand as the ideal emblem of solidarity, inspiration, aspiration, resurrection, and regeneration. As the passing sands of time bury civilization upon civilization beneath their weight, the pyramid shall remain as the visible covenant between eternal wisdom and the world. The time may yet come when the chant of the illumined shall be heard once more in its ancient passageways, and the master of the hidden house shall wait in the silent place for the coming of that man who, casting aside the fallacies of dogma and tenet, seeks simply truth and will be satisfied with neither substitute nor counterfeit. And so ends Chapter 7 of The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Mr. Manly Hall. And there was a good bit in here. There's a lot here that I am not technically able to expound upon. That's why I pointed you towards Jason Brashears, who I am sure will take a particular interest into the Phoenix event, right? That's why I point you towards Suspicious Observers. That's why I point you towards Randall Carlson, even though that will piss Jason Brashears off. I point you towards other people who are more technically precise than me, who I have gained knowledge from, so that you can go and gain knowledge from them. Don't take what they say at face value. Go back and read it for yourself. Go back and do it for yourself. Don't take what I say at face value. I am remarkably honest, right? I got a 300% honesty policy. I'm 100% honest with me, I'm 100% honest with you, and I'm 100% honest with God. And that makes it for a very difficult place to walk. I try to point out when I am being conspiratorial or when I am pulling conclusions out of my butt. Right? I try to be clear about that. I try to say in my conspiratorial mind, because I don't source. I don't keep those records here. I don't need to. My mind works in a different way. My stack is different than some people's stack. I think in different ways than other people do. And that is one of the things that we talk about getting yourself aligned correctly. Because if you're not specifically targeting yourself and you're trying to follow somebody else's rules, you're not going to get it right. That includes the things that I say. I am giving you a toolbox to help you do things. It has a toolbox that has worked for me, but it might not for you. I hope it does. It has worked for other people. I have given people toolboxes to their own brains, and it worked. I've given people toolboxes to enlightenment, and it works. I have given people toolboxes to use the energetic forces to heal yourself, and it's worked. And so I'm not merely pulling things out of my butt, but don't take me for granted. Go back always to the source material. That's why I try to tell you, right? I'll link whatever I'm currently working on, but I try to point out other people who are more technically precise than me. I want you to have knowledge. That is the key goal here. And it doesn't really matter to me. Like, I want to be right. But if I am wrong, I will take correction. You don't see that enough out there. We need to be the example of that here, right? This crew, the people who came along this far in the journey that they're listening to me talk right now. You are the people who need to take the responsibility to make sure that we are technically precise in the things that we're talking about and be willing to be corrected. We need to be the example of that. With that being said, if you like what I'm doing here, hit me down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree, if it stays respectful, it gets to stay up. And if you really like what I'm doing here, hit me with that super thanks. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.